Advancing on Afrin in a bid to defeat the YPG. But after the Turkish military suffers its largest single-day death toll, is success any closer? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmakers are the Turkish-backed forces in northern Syria. Turkey's president went before members of his ruling party with a message of strength, one that says his forces are close to defeating terrorists in northern Syria. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told the AK Party Congress that almost 1,000 YPG militants have been killed in the past 2 weeks, and Turkish troops are now in control of strategic areas in the mountains surrounding the city of Afrin. But Turkey's advance is proving costly. The Turkish military suffered its deadliest day during the offensive when 8 troops were killed after an attack on a tank. The Prime Minister has vowed retribution. So is this operation really nearing completion? Here's Shoaib Hassan.
A last salute by his brothers-in-arms to this Turkish soldier, among 8 killed after their tank was hit by a rocket. It was the Turkish military's largest loss of life since Operation Olive Branch was launched last month against the YPG. They're the Syrian wing of the PKK terror group, which has killed thousands of people across Turkey in a decades-long campaign. The operation supports fighters from the opposition Free Syrian Army, and Turkish officials say so far it's been successful. The aim is to establish a so-called safe zone 30 kilometers inside Syria's Afrin province. Officials say it's also to eliminate the YPG from the area and prevent them from launching attacks into Turkey. Ankara says its forces have neutralized more than 900 terrorists, mostly from the YPG, and destroyed over 500 camps. 15 Turkish soldiers have also died, while YPG rocket attacks into Turkey have left 7 civilians dead. An independent monitor says civilians inside Syria have also been killed, but Turkish officials deny this. The officials also say the YPG attacks have only toughened their resolve. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has reiterated the operation will continue until the entire Turkish border is free of the YPG, insisting that Turkish forces could push ahead to the city of Manbij, something that could prove to be a flashpoint with the United States. The YPG has been backed by the US, and the Turkish offensive has already strained ties with Washington, with a key ally in a showdown with the West's main partner against Daesh. Relationships are further complicated by Ankara's assertion that arms the US has supplied to the YPG are being used against Turkey.
Tahminler var, tahminleri benimle paylaştılar ama şu anda bunları açıklamak doğru olmaz düşüncesindeyim. Öyle veya böyle. Bunu veren kim olursa olsun teröristlerle beraber demek ki bu yolda yürüyorlar. Ve bunlar netleştiği zaman da bunu biz tüm dünyayla paylaşırız.
That's happening as supporters of the PKK hold demonstrations across Europe, and some European leaders condemn Turkey for what they say is an invasion. Will the rise in tensions among allies continue as the operation rolls on? Or will Turkey manage to bring an end to the offensive with a status quo accepted by the international community? Shoaib Hassan, the newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Baghdad is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He's a former spokesman for the US military. And with me here in the studio, we have Dima Musa. She's a member of the opposition Syrian National Coalition. And Selim Atalay. He's a journalist and commentator for the Turkish broadcaster 24 TV. Thank you all for joining us. Let me start with you, Selim. It was a bad weekend on a particular day for Turkish soldiers, deadliest day over the weekend.
Unfortunately.
Did you expect this cost when Operation Olive Branch was announced?
Yes and no. Of course, not one single loss is desired and wanted. But what's going to happen is a part of an overall security operation that has been going on in other parts of the country, southeast Turkey and other side of the border. So yes, unfortunately, casualties take place. But in the end, security and assuring the border security matters more. So, and Turkish support, Turkish national support is wholly behind this operation. So,
yeah, talking about being behind the operation, Dima, Syrian opposition generally behind it. Tell me why.
Well, obviously, we have our issues with the YPG groups, which are backed by the PKK. We consider any radical groups a threat to Syrians and Syrian security.
Mm-hmm. And General Kimmitt, let me bring you in here. When this was launched on January 20th, there were lots of questions about the operation, lots of questions about the fault lines between the U.S. and Turkey. You know, the U.S. backing the other side, the side that Turkey wants to pummel in this. Given where we are right now, is this how you expected things to turn out in the state of play?
Well, again, first of all, let me offer my condolences to those families in Turkey who've lost their loved ones. It's never a good day. It is always a sad day when families lose soldiers in combat. Surprisingly, I thought that this operation would move much quicker. I'm sad to see that this has slowed down. I think it's indicative of how the YPG wants to fight this fight. And if they continue to fight in this manner, I would expect this operation to go a little bit longer than we had hoped.
Yeah, it's interesting that they are putting up some stubborn resistance, and it brings me to ask you, given that the United States supports them, what do you make of the YPG's tactics? Now, I know it doesn't technically support them in the fight against Turkey, but it supports them when they fight Daesh, and by default then, you know, people make the connection. When we look at the tactics, suicide bombings, firing rockets into Turkey, is there a conundrum here for the United States?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the tactics that are being used. I was surprised, would have expected to see the forces hunker down in the cities because those forces have the advantage inside the cities. They take away all of the advantages that the attacker has. The attacker can't use his jet aircraft, can't use his heavy artillery, and so he must, as we've seen inside of Iraq, in Mosul, Ramadi, in other tough battles, that all those advantages come down and are eliminated and come down to fighting man-to-man, street-to-street, block-to-block.
Is there a conundrum, General Kimmitt, for the United States, given the tactics used by the YPGs and that they're allies, albeit in another fight, but they're allies and they're using all the tactics of a terror group?
Well, I think what we're seeing is this is a relatively slow battle on the part of the YPG as well. They aren't getting the support of the United States. They aren't getting the artillery. They aren't getting the aircraft. And so I would expect over time that the superior forces inside of Turkey will overwhelm them. As for the U.S. political considerations on this, again, we have asked that this operation be short, try to avoid civilian casualties at all costs, and hopefully we can get those security issues reestablished along the border so there's no need to fight.
Salim Atalay, does it sound reasonable to you?
It's interesting that the general is recalling the old memories of the Iraqi invasion. No, there won't be a Fallujah here. If the operation is slow, because Turkey is paying utmost attention to the civilian casualties, where is Afrin? 30 kilometers from the border? How long does it take for an armored column to reach 30 kilometers from the border? It's a matter of hours. In that sense, it's not much difficult to reach to that target, but again, civilian casualties, civilian centers, and I don't agree that Turkey needs to, or Turkish forces or Turkish-supported fighters need to fight street battles in the cities. There's something called isolating the cities, surrendering them and surrounding them and isolating them and moving on. So that might be tried.
Well, I mean, Salim, Turkey says almost 1,000 terrorists have been killed, according to the president.
That too.
That suggests that there are a lot of fighters, right? Might it be more difficult than Turkey had imagined, given that the YPG are a tough bunch?
Don't think so. We have been following, as Turkey and observers and everyone, media have been following what's going on in Afrin for 2 years. They had ample time to beef up their defenses, bring out their weapons, and whatever defenses we have seen concrete bunkers on the mountains. So they had ample time to dig up and do concrete bunkers in there. So our unofficial estimates range from 3 to 6 months to end this whole operation.
That's really interesting, because that's, I mean, we got the sense from President Erdogan that it might be done soon, but
if it goes faster, then there will be the casualties on the other side would reach to 4 digits. Then yes.
Dima, why is the FSA the right group for Turkey to partner with here?
Well, I mean, they have partnered before in the Euphrates Shield area, and there's an interest, and there's a vested interest, obviously, for Syrians also to fight the radicals, as I mentioned earlier. You don't want to view Turkey as an invader, so it is to its interest to depend on its local partners on the ground. And also, you know, Syrians will, they will make sure, I think, even more so than Turkey, which I know it's interested in ensuring that civilian casualties are limited or not have any casualties at all.
All right, but then there's war plans and there's war reality, and it's interesting because we're not quite sure where it's going right now. There are suggestions, General Kimmit, that Turkey's going to go on to Manbij after that, and on, and even as far as Iraq afterwards. Would that be the right thing to do, or a mistake in your opinion?
Well, I think it'll be surprising if that in fact happens. Again, this is a slow operation. I would expect it to go on for quite some time, as your other guest said. It may well be that the determination is made by the government of Turkey that sufficient terrorists have been neutralized, to use the term that the government uses, so that they no longer present a threat. I think it would be unfortunate if the Turkish forces then did start heading east after taking Afrin city and start towards Manbij. I know that our two militaries are talking extensively, because that's the last thing I think either of the NATO allies want to see, that we would actually start having two NATO allies potentially in conflict with each other. So no, I don't expect to see the Turkish forces go all the way to the border of Iraq.
And is there any likelihood, General Kimmit, that these two NATO allies will end up clashing on the battlefield, whether by mistake or design?
Well, I think if it does happen, it would be more by mistake than design. That would be the last thing that anybody would want to see. NATO has had both partners inside the alliance for over 50 years. NATO would probably be cracked, if not completely destroyed, if we had a situation where two of its major contributors were fighting each other.
Okay. So Salim, Emmanuel Macron, President of France,
sure,
talking about the Turkish intervention and then mentioning terms such as territorial conquest. This would have been a form of invasion. It would have been a problem which warranted our response. Just throwing out these terms. Tell me why it's so hard for... Tell me why it's so hard to convince critics that Turkey doesn't have any greater designs beyond just destroying the YPG and going back home.
Mr. Macron should know this better. I wonder what he's doing in Mali and Northwest Africa and surrounding areas. So Sahel region, does that ring a bell?
But that's what they do. I mean, France has a history there, colonial
so
history.
If France can do it and Turkey cannot?
But Turkey's saying it's not doing it. That's Turkey
is Turkey is doing it. As far as that's how we got the message. We got the message as Macron warning that it shouldn't be an invasion, and Turkey is saying no, it's not an invasion. It's an anti-terror operation, which requires an extensive military involvement. Yes, same thing happened in Al Bab. It took quite some time. We forgot the exact time frame, but reaching to Al Bab and cleaning up the area, surrounding area also took time. So Afrin might take more time. But back to General's comments, Manbij should not be a Saigon, so it shouldn't be a more struggle between two allies. There's enough damage, more than enough damage already occurred in the relations on the NATO alliance and everything. There's not much to lift up from this point on.
Okay, so
this is serious.
Okay, General Kimmit, you had a bit of a shake of the head there when he said Saigon. Tell me why.
Well, I don't understand what the comparison is with Saigon. But back to your point, I think both France and Turkey perhaps have a different interpretation. This is not going to be the second Gulf War. I believe Turkey when it says it would be much like the first Gulf War. Go in, destroy the terrorists, and then pull out. So I take President Erdogan at his word. I would think that after they feel sufficient terrorists have been neutralized, that Turkey will then return to its borders and ensure that its borders remain safe. But I don't believe it has any territorial aspirations.
Right. Dima, big picture, HTS shot down a Russian warplane in northwestern Idlib. This is a de-escalation zone, but Hayat Tahrir al-Sham are sort of fair game for these countries to attack. We look at another suspected chlorine attack, regime airstrikes in eastern Ghouta. Yes. So let's fold all of this in. Let's look at Idlib and look at what's happening elsewhere on the ground and look at what's happening in northern Syria now. Is the relative calm that we had in the past year unraveling, and are things ramping up all over the country now?
They are, and I don't know, I'm not sure there was actually, I guess relative is relative. So it's very little, the whole idea of the de-escalation zones hadn't really have really succeeded anywhere. Right. There were a few areas where there was a little bit of calm, but overall, the de-escalation zones did not really see any de-escalation. And as you've seen over the last few days, there's been actually an escalation of violence in the areas you mentioned, Eastern Ghouta and in Idlib, and this comes at the end of the Sochi Congress, which was a complete failure in terms of what Russia wanted from it. It didn't get the political victory it wanted from it to show that it's a true and credible partner in the political process to resolve what's happening in Syria. And now it's along with the regime, they're going back to what they know how to do best, which is using the military force.
General Kimmitt, very finally, is this going to end well for Turkey and the US as friends and both getting what they want out of Syria?
Yeah, I'm optimistic that we will get over this short-term issue between our two countries, because at the end of the day, this isn't going to be solved inside of Syria with military force. We've got to get onto the diplomatic track. I, too, was disappointed in the poor results in Sochi. I think it's important to keep our eye on the ball, which is to get back to diplomacy so that we can have humanitarian relief, we can have reconstruction, and we can focus on the governance of a post-Assad regime.
Okay. Mark Kimmitt, Dima Musa, and Salim Atalay, it's been good to talk to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the Newsmakers, why the controversy surrounding this Catholic bishop has become a major embarrassment for Pope Francis. And
I'm in Jaffna in northern Sri Lanka to find out what people think about a possible change to the constitution and whether there's support for one of the proposals, which is a power-sharing arrangement between Colombo and regions like this.
Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Sri Lanka is marking 70 years of independence from British colonial rule, and government celebrations are being held under the theme One Nation to symbolize the country's unity. But some see that as ironic. After all, this is an island still coming to grips with a legacy of nearly 3 decades of civil war. And for many, there's only one solution: changing the country's constitution. In the first part of our special series this week, Natalie Perhernan traveled to Sri Lanka to find out if there is a desire for that kind of political change.
Peace and tranquility in northern Sri Lanka are indisputable. Life, on the surface at least, is routine, with the morning catch making its way from the sea to the cellars. But a key measure of progress for many people in this region would be the ability to have a greater say about how their day-to-day lives are governed. And that could be possible if there is a change to the constitution to allow for more power sharing between Colombo and regions like this. Jaffna is the Tamil heartland. For decades, people here have called for greater political freedoms for the Tamil minority, living in a singular majority nation. It was one of the root causes which led to 26 years of civil war. On these streets, people seem wary of putting too much faith in political reform, but there is a cautious optimism.
Even though the war came to an end, even though there is talk of a new constitution, Tamils are yet to enjoy freedom.
When considering Jaffna, this constitution must ensure benefits to the people.
Nagaraja Prem Kumar founded this learning centre for children. Nagaraja says decentralising power to local authorities would make a real difference to the Tamil community, and particularly to the youngest generation.
Issues such as low economic growth, lack of fulfillment in essential needs and unemployment have been prominent in these areas. The development process will be sped up if a more independent local body is given more responsibilities.
That's one of the proposals put forward in the interim report of the steering committee looking at constitutional reform. It says Sri Lanka should remain one undivided and indivisible country, but maximum devolution should be granted. And that's the phrase which is causing concern because opponents say it could pave the way for a breakaway state. Sri Lanka is a compact nation. It's just 65,000 square kilometres. That's about 4 times smaller than the United Kingdom. Those opposed to the devolution of power worry that making such a change to the constitution could break apart this multi-religious and multi-ethnic island. Kahelia Rambukwala was a minister under the former president Mahinda Rajapaksa.
We are not for a division of the country. We're not for a federalism, very clearly. Because this country, as a unit, has to run. And if you walk around any of this, and you will get many people in many events, many areas, Tamils, Muslims, Sinhalese, quite harmoniously working together. So there is no reason for one to separate and to have, because that will create, not right now, in the long term, it will create a separatism.
Jayampati Wickramaratne is a member of the Constitutional Steering Committee.
The people who are against devolution want the state to be controlled by the Sinhala Buddhist majority. And that is why they oppose devolution.
This year, Sri Lanka is marking 70 years of independence. For many, it's a time for reflection. M.A. Sumantharan is one of the nation's highest-profile Tamil politicians.
When we were granted independence from Britain, we were given a system of government that was a simple majority rule, and that did not work. That immediately caused several problems because there was a permanent majority and a permanent minority.
At a Colombo cafe, I meet with a Muslim writer, a Sinhalese Buddhist lawyer and a Tamil student who are all in their 20s to find out what they think of the reform debate.
I feel that there's a lack of representation. You see Colombo people, engaging in these active debates and discussions, but I hardly see people who come from, outside Colombo taking part in these conversations.
We are just coming out of a 3-decade-long war. We have to be extremely careful not to start something else, not to start something like that again, because frankly, I'm terrified of that.
If we can actually abide by how the Constitution says, giving importance to fundamental rights, or giving importance to equality of people, we can actually strive as one nation, and that is really important to Sri Lanka because, like I said, it's a small country, but it has lots of potential.
Ultimately, the decision to change the constitution will be made by the people and not the politicians. And it's the people who will have to make a choice about whether this is a necessary step to unite the island for the future after its divisive past. Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers, Colombo.
Well, joining me now from Colombo is Delante Witanage. He's the CEO of Bodu Bala Sena, an ultra-nationalist Buddhist organization. Also in Colombo, human rights activist Ruki Fernando. And in London, we have Alan Keenan. He's the Sri Lanka project director for the International Crisis Group. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Ruki Fernando, let me start with you. Sri Lanka celebrating 70 years of independence. Tell me why you think this is the right time to talk about changing the constitution.
Although we are celebrating 70 years of independence from the British, there are many people in this country, Sri Lankans, who don't feel that they are very free and that they are treated equally in the country by the state as well as by other communities and other individuals. So a constitution is a very basic kind of an understanding and a consensus between the state and its citizens, but also in a way among citizens and among different communities. Agreement where each one is treated with dignity and has equal rights. So I think it's a very good opportunity to talk about new constitution, which I think has been long overdue, actually.
Okay, Delante, doesn't that sound smart? Good opportunity. Take stock, celebrate what was valuable over the past 70 years, but try to solve some of the root causes through tweaking and toggling the constitution.
I believe that we have got political independence in 1948, but during last 70 years, we failed to obtain necessary other components of freedom, economic freedom and social freedom. And still, we believe that there is a need for constitutional change, there is need for constitutional reforms, but what type of constitutional reform is required is the problem.
Okay, so Delante, what we heard from Ruki is that minorities are not essentially fully protected because of how it's worded in the current constitution. Do you agree with that?
I do not agree with Ruki and many others who claim that there are issues for minorities. Now, if you look at Sri Lanka, and I believe that all people enjoy equal freedom. If you look at the constitutions in this country, I believe that whether you are Sinhalese, Tamil or Muslim, we have equal rights and human rights. But unfortunately, I believe that certain rights of even Sinhalese, the so-called majority, is also not protected. So I believe that we should not think about Sinhalese as our Tamils or Muslims. We think about basically as citizens of this country, and we should have a constitutional reform looking at people, human, not as solving problems of Tamils or Muslims or Sinhalese.
Okay.
And therefore, I think...
Okay, let me bring in Alan Keenan here, because from the International Crisis Group, I mean, your recommendations try to put out fires and try to kind of forewarn where there might be tension brewing. And with a place like Sri Lanka, terrible civil war, it comes out of it, and now there's a political debate bubbling at the moment. What's the right way to go? To change the constitution, or to take Delante's approach where you say, no, we don't have to change it by giving specific added advantages to minorities? How do they move forward?
Well, it's long and complicated, but I think there's actually broad consensus, both in the parliament and outside the country, or in the country outside the parliament, for significant changes which would enhance provincial powers. In fact, for all parts of the country, not just the Tamil majority and Tamil and Muslim majority north and east. But those are the areas which have consistently felt excluded and marginalized, both through the Constitution, but more generally politically. And I think there actually is the consensus now to address those issues. The problem is that the party politics have made both the two main members of the coalition government, the SLFP on the president's side and the UNP on the prime minister's side, shy of pursuing the constitutional reform process with the boldness and the public outreach that's needed to really win people over. So I think the question is, do they have the political will in the coming months to really take the project which they've begun and which has made some impressive progress in Parliament, to really take it forward and convince the majority of the people that these changes are needed.
Okay, so Ruki, why haven't they had the political will in recent times to move it forward? What's paralyzed them?
I think there is a denial on the part of some political leaders, some religious leaders, some civil leaders of problems that we have faced in the past and the problems that we still face. For example, we clearly have in our constitution laws that discriminate women. We have laws that discriminate and allows child marriages. So those things have to be acknowledged first. And we also have law, I mean, our constitution says foremost place is given to the religion of the numerical majority in the country. So we first have to acknowledge those things, and if we fail to acknowledge those things, it's very difficult to move forward. And I think there needs to be an effort by the political leadership in particular, and especially at a junction when the two major parties that have ruled Sri Lanka for 70 years are in even an uneasy coalition, to deal and confront difficult and controversial issues. These would be like sharing power and some form of autonomy for different provinces, dealing with the concept of a secular state, doing away with discriminatory and oppressive personal laws.
Right. Delante, for those who say that Sri Lanka is a Sinhalese-dominated country and a Buddhist-dominated country, and because that's on the books, that makes it difficult for it to square its responsibilities as a secular democracy, what do you respond?
I think I have to address this issue now. For example, many internationally understand, because they just calculate the whole the number of people living in this country, but you have to understand certain demographics. Like, for example, if you think about, everybody says that Tamils and Muslims are harassed in this country, but if you really look at it, percentage of Tamils live in this country. People internationally should know. If you look at the north and east, only less than 50% Tamils. If you look at the total population of Tamils in this country, over 50% live with Sinhalese in other provinces, not in the north and east. So then how you can say that these people are harassed or discriminated by us? And at the same time, you have to understand that I also agree on that because of the party politics, we are facing a lot of problems, not because of any of these issues. And you know that we had a civil war between, I can't say it's between Sinhalese and Tamils, but it's because of international agenda. Actually, they want to create a global Tamil agenda is there, so they want to create a Tamil nation in this country.
Okay.
So,
okay,
but at the same time,
certainly, and some people are, some people have conflated Tamils in general with the Tamil Tigers, and it's a good point to bring it up. Let me ask you, Ruki, about the claim that Delante made, saying the harassment of Tamils and Muslims and others might be exaggerated. Is that true?
No, it has been the case in the past. I have seen it myself. For example, I've been at checkpoints in the past when the military sees my identity card. It's very clear I'm a Sinhalese, the way it's presented and the way it's written. And then even other Sinhalese in the checkpoint are allowed to go quite easily, and the Tamils are detained and questioned more. So it's quite clear at that beginning itself. And till today, there are Tamils who get letters in Sinhalese, including even the chief minister of the northern province has got letters from government officials in Sinhalese, when the majority of the population in that province is Tamil speaking. And this is also true for, I think, what Delante said of Tamil staying in other parts of the country, not just in the north and east. Even in the hill country, where there's a significant number of Tamil speaking peoples, they still have to deal with government officials in a language that they don't understand. And I think about a month ago, I was in Trincomalee, in a very rural place, where there was a court order delivered to a Tamil community, asking them not to do something in Sinhalese. How could they obey a court order that is delivered to them in a language that they can't understand? And this is just a month ago. And if you also take the number of physical acts of violence against religious communities, clearly the most of the violence in the last several years, including the last 3 years under this government, has been directed to Christians and Muslims.
Okay, so
and
let me
these have been
good points. Okay, so you gave us a bunch of examples. Delante, has any of that convinced you? Because he's rolled off a bunch of examples.
What I'm trying to say now, even if you look at in Sri Lanka, even 71 we had 70 and 80, 89 we had JVP troubles also. In that trouble, also Sinhalese people had problem. When you know in any country, if people take arms and doing terrorist activities, government forces should be taken necessary steps in order to provide democracy to other people. So you should not just say that it's only for Tamils. It's basically if people take arms and fighting and killing, bombing people and destroying buildings, everything happens. Now I have a very particular question. Now if you look at Colombo, everybody says that it's a Sinhalese country. Now if you look at the Colombo city, and government ruling party is putting a Muslim as the candidate of the mayoral candidate of Colombo city. And if you look at the Colombo city, only less than 50% are Sinhalese. More than 50% are Muslims and Tamils. So if Sri Lanka is a country where they exercise those discriminative activities, how it happens?
Okay, so Ruki, please answer that very quickly because I want to get Alan in for a final comment. Ruki, how do you answer that? He's giving you examples of minorities who are succeeding and excelling.
There's tokenistic political representation in the two major political parties, which are predominantly Sinhalese. Doesn't mean that Tamils are represented. Just as the tokenistic representation of a few women doesn't mean that women are represented politically.
Okay. Alan Keenan, for those who say, well, there was a terrible civil war, and maybe all of this just has to do with essentially ironing out the crinkles of a long and terrible history, and it will take time. Is that a fair argument, or does the Sri Lankan government have to actively try to kind of prevent something ugly from happening and take action immediately?
Well, the way I'd put it is there's a window of opportunity, quite unprecedented actually, where you have the two main parties, Sinhala-dominated parties, in government together, which gives them the 2/3 majority that's necessary to change the constitution. This is something that has never happened in Sri Lanka's independence history. So there's finally the window to actually get the majority you need in parliament to make changes. And the underlying issue that has led to a civil war, extremely bloody and destructive civil war in which all communities have suffered, is the status of the Tamil majority regions in the north and the east, where Tamils have consistently felt excluded and marginalized as a minority who can never have any kind of controlling influence in the country as a whole, but who wish to have some sort of control over their land, their culture, the way they're policed, et cetera, and on the sort of certain key issues. They've never had that. They've been asking for it. They asked for it politely for many years. They didn't get it. They asked for it through violence. They didn't get it. Now we have a very unusual window of opportunity that needs to be seized quite aggressively and productively and creatively by this government. And I think the jury's still out about whether the government will be able to do that, but I hope they do.
Yeah, next time on the Newsmakers, we will be talking about reconciliation efforts. But for now, gentlemen, I've got to move on. I thank you all for joining us. Delante Wittanage, Ruki Fernando, and Alan Keenan. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers.
The day they bring me proof against Bishop Barros, then I will speak. There is not a single piece of proof against him. Everything is slander. Is that clear?
Well, it seems everything wasn't clear for Pope Francis, because just days after making that comment, he was forced to send the Vatican's top sex crimes expert to Chile. The investigation targets Bishop Juan Barros and whether the church official covered up the crimes of a pedophile priest. And while the Vatican says new evidence has emerged, critics have lambasted the Pope, saying he doesn't understand the depth of the crisis in South America. Well, let's go to our panel now. In London is the president of the National Secular Society UK, Keith Porteous-Wood. And we also have Jack Valero. He's the founder of Catholic Voices, a project aiming to improve the church's representation in the media. And finally, in Rome, Christopher Lamb, a correspondent for The Tablet, an international Catholic news weekly. I thank you all for joining us. Christopher Lamb, let me begin with you. Some see this as damage limitation from the Vatican because of the embarrassment of supporting Barros, and eventually they've sent this investigator. Is that how it played out?
Well, I think it was tough action that the Pope needed to take in this case. As you report said, the Pope had upset victims by saying that accusations that Bishop Barros was accused of a cover-up were calumny, and therefore to send Archbishop Scicluna, who is really the toughest or most credible investigator on abuse that the Church has, was A, a bit of a volte-face, to be honest, but B, it was the tough action that I think the Pope needed to take to get a grip of this story. The other thing that has developed today is that a letter was sent to the Pope in 2015 detailing some of the claims against Barros and detailing the abuse that Barros is said to have witnessed. So this is an issue. This is a case that is kind of spiraling out of control a bit for Francis. So I think that the sending of Scicluna was absolutely necessary, and I think does show that the Pope is willing to take action.
All right. So Keith, the Pope twice rejected Barros's resignation. He tried to stop others from getting Barros to resign. He defended Barros very recently, saying there's no evidence. And even if, Keith, this has been damage limitation by sending Scicluna, this guy is the gold standard. He's the best investigator around, and the Pope's taking this seriously. Should we be giving credit where it's due. He's doing something about it right now.
Well, I think we all agree that it's damage limitation, but I'm afraid I have history with Archbishop Scicluna. When I, after a great deal of effort, was helping the UN Committee for the Rights of the Child to actually take on the Holy See over child abuse about 5 years ago, the person they sent to speak for the Holy See, one of the two spokespersons was Archbishop Scicluna. And the evasion that I witnessed and the hostility subsequently when the committee produced its report asking for rather reasonable things like immediately removing all known and suspected child abuse abusers from assignment and referring them to law enforcement and ensuring transparent sharing of all archives, all they got back from the Vatican and the Holy See was an attack, and I think impertinence.
Okay.
I mean, that should have been a to-do list that they didn't need to start a commission.
Okay, so Jack, does Keith make a good point that even the guy who is sent now to help combat abuse and finally put an end to this and investigate this, he might have a not so great resume in Keith's eyes? Is that fair?
I don't think so. I think he's the best you can find. He's not afraid of telling truth to power and of anyone or anything. I think there was a particular thing with the United Nations Rights of the Child Committee, who had written their report before he actually arrived and didn't take account of the things that he told them, which was not very well done then. But I think if we put that aside, he's a very particular, very meticulous man. He will definitely investigate. I think the Pope believes Barros to be innocent, but obviously he's realized that that's not enough. It's not enough for him to think he's innocent. He must, some impartial person must go there and leave no stone unturned. So I, as a Catholic, feel very happy that somebody has gone who is impartial and who can ask all the people and let us know after investigation what the situation is. I think the situation of the church in Chile is different from the situation of the church in Argentina, where the Pope comes from. There's a lot more clericalism and many more problems. So I think that the Pope perhaps needs to do more there, which he hadn't realized before.
Right.
So sending Scicluna, I think, is a good move.
Christopher Lamb, just sort of stepping back and trying to contextualize this for the moment, because you hinted in your first answer that something big is afoot, right? Just remind us. So we have Barros being accused of covering up the crimes of a pedophile priest. That priest, called Reverend Fernando Karadima, sanctioned by the Vatican in 2011. Just remind us of how toxic that situation was with Karadima and just what he did.
Well, Karadima is accused of abuse of a number of minors, a number of children. Karadima was a hugely charismatic figure in Chile and a mentor to a number of the bishops, including to Bishop Barros. Now, in the latest story that's been produced today by AP, Barros himself is accused of having some sort of relationship with Karadima, and Karadima possibly abusing Barros. So it's a hugely toxic and difficult situation there in Chile. When Pope Francis appointed Barros to the Diocese of Osorno, which is where he is currently, there were protests outside the cathedral for the ordination service. This has been something that has been a problem for Francis for some time, and I think that whilst this Pope is widely seen as a very popular, reform-minded Pope who has won the support of the vast majority of Catholics, on this issue, which is such a toxic issue, it is threatening to cause problems for this Pope. He is the Teflon Pope in many ways, but this issue has the potential to kind of pierce through some of that Teflon.
Right. So, Jack, is that accurate? Has this maybe put a dent in the Teflon? Has this hurt the church and Pope Francis and this kind of, you know, this angelic image that he's had across the world among Catholics and non-Catholics as well?
Yes, perhaps it has. And I think that, I mean, I think personally within him, he's definitely against all child abuse, and he's for zero tolerance, and he wants what everybody wants, you know, the three things, that this never happens again, that the victims are recompensed, that the perpetrators are punished, and there's cover-up. But is he
not at all
serious enough to do something about it? And therefore, what he needs to do a number of things, like he needs to make sure that the commission that was set up for the purpose works again, is in a bit of a hiatus at the moment. He needs to look at specific places where this is a big problem, like Chile, where it has been a big problem, and he needs to take more action.
Okay,
but
so
I think this could be the beginning, the beginning of something.
Okay, interesting point. So Keith, right, when Jack said very specifically, this Pope is against child abuse, you shook your head in disagreement and had a wry smile. You can't tell me the Pope is pro-child abuse, can you?
Well, he hasn't done very much about it, and we are, even before he was Pope, if we go back to the much respected Bishop Accountability website, we will actually discover that he was saying that there was no problem in his diocese. And yet there were 4 named people who were abusers and evidence, abuse victims, and there's evidence that he knowingly or unwittingly, I quote, slowed victims in their fight to expose and prosecute them. They sought the Cardinal's help and none of them received it, and that's been confirmed by his former spokesperson. So he's got form. I saw over a period of 4 years what happened at the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and it's very clear that with the hostility and impertinence of the exchanges there, and you just can't imagine that that could happen without the Pope, the new Pope's personal direction. And then you have this commission, which Jack's generously admitted is basically dead in the water, with the 2 only victims on it having departed in a complete disgust. Peter from NAPAC actually said that he begged the Pope to attend one of their meetings, but what did he do? He spent the whole day watching a procession of coffins. So, I mean, it really is terrible. The tribunal that was set up was done suspiciously soon after the first person was convicted for child endangerment in the States. And it was effectively providing an alternative route to avoid those people going through the criminal process, okay, so let me the very thing the UN asked for.
Okay, fair enough. So Jack, you would, I guess, respect that this comes from a good place, because Keith cares about children not being abused by priests, right? Would you accept
so we all care about
would
them,
you accept and respect his skepticism that even this Pope, even Pope Francis, the reformer, the superstar Pope, is not doing enough?
Well, what is enough? It's never enough until it's sorted. I mean, we've seen that structures of power are the problem. I mean, we've seen it in Hollywood. We've seen it in premiership clubs. When there is power which is unchecked, then these things happen. And this is what happened in Chile, in that parish. This is what's happened in other places. One thing is what has gone wrong, and the other thing is whether this Pope in his heart wants to sort it. I think he does want to sort it, and therefore he has sent this man to investigate. Once this has happened, lots more needs to happen, but it's going in the right direction. I don't believe that it is a lost cause, as Keith seems to imply.
Okay, so
no, it's going, we're doing things about it.
Okay, so Christopher, in terms of public opinion, and this is where it gets a little bit murky now, because everybody's talking about it right now, and everybody was upset that the Pope seemed to maybe be insensitive to alleged victims, initially by defending the man and saying there's no evidence. Now he sent an investigator. It's locked into a kind of inevitability now, isn't it? Because anything other than Barros maybe being found guilty would be unsatisfactory, right?
Well, I think then it's going to need to be some action. I mean, Archbishop Scicluna's investigation is likely to report sometime in the next few months we probably won't see the outcome of that report, and it will be kept between the Pope and Scicluna. But I think this is something that the Pope needs to get ahead of, get a grip on. I think there is a distinction, though, to be made between what the Pope is accused of in this case and what other bishops have been accused of. The Pope is being accused here of being insensitive to victims, to not making the needs of victims a high enough priority. Now, he's not being accused of a specific cover-up, but he's been accused of insensitivity to victims. Now, that's where the Church has now got to deal with the sex abuse scandal. It's moved from the cover-up area, which of course still are cover-ups, but it's moved much more to a situation where are you as a Pope, as the Vatican, dealing with, taking this issue seriously enough, taking the needs of victims seriously enough, and responding? And that's where the Pope seems to have fallen down or fallen short.
Yep.
Or seems to have a blind spot.
Right.
But I think that with this case, with the Barros case, the Pope does need to respond, to take action. And I think the Scicluna move goes some of the way to dealing with that. We'll have to see what Scicluna comes back with and what the Pope decides to do. Of course, we won't be privy to the details of the inquiry, though.
Right. OK, Keith, I know you want to come in. I'm completely out of time, so I'm going to give you 20 seconds, if you don't mind, if you could keep rigidly to that. 20 seconds. Go, Keith.
Well, I think the Pope, his record is exposed by his willingness to support Barros and also Cardinal Pell, whose reputation was well known. Anybody would steer away from those people if they were of right mind.
OK, so let's try and see what happens when Scicluna actually goes and what comes out of it. Gentlemen, it's been good to talk to you about a very important topic. Keith Porteous-Wood, Jack Valero and Christopher Lamb. I thank you all for joining us on The Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, we continue our special series on Sri Lanka. Is the country any closer to giving justice to the victims of war crimes? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.